In continuation to the previous video where we talked about the different types of identities, today we are going to explore workload identities. Hello everyone, my name is Arun and I'm a solutions architect with Novintech, which is a great organization to work with. And I'm also MCT, and today we are exploring workload identities under Describe the Types of Identities Part 2. This is 2. All right. So, in order to understand the concept, because these are described things under SC 900, I have created this diagram where this is Entra ID, the identity home, and we have subscriptions where we are running multiple resources. And this subscription is linked with the Entra ID. All right. Now, what happens in a normal or usually the application which needs to talk to the database, and when database says I don't know who you are, tell me who you are, app needs to present the username and password, right? What are these username and password? These are the things that is there in the connection string, right? So who is managing these username and password? Because this could be an security risk, right? There's another set of username and password that needs to be managed. So this is managed by developers. So in order to make it more secure, there are different types of identities for the workload. Yes. If we go further into workloads identities, as we did in the user identities, even user identities were 4 more. If you remember, guest, member, internal, external. Similarly, the workload identities are divided into 2: service principal and managed identities. We have covered this in previous videos like years back, but that's all right. We need to cover it for the sake of this particular series. And if there would be anything changed, we'll add it here because everything is changing so rapidly. Anyway, so instead of providing username and password manually and keeping it there in the connection string, which is not a good security practice, what we can do, we can create a service principal. What do I mean by that? We can simply register this application with the Entra ID. What will happen then? Then there will be an identity object will be created here. Okay. And we can give access to this identity. And now this Entra ID is aware that this app exists and we have given access to this identity on database, which means when database will ask, it can simply authenticate itself through Entra ID and simply access the database. Because when we create the service principal, we get client ID and service key or cert, whatever we like. So it is like a identity, but not a user for a workload, right? It's an service principal. So we create in the Entra ID when we register the application. We have created it many times in our previous video. All right, so this is a service principal, but still in that situation, we still have the ID and password for this identity. But in order to make it more secure, there is another identity for the workload, which is called managed identity. So what will happen in that situation? Again, service principal will be created, but you are not doing it. You are just enabling the managed identity on the resource. Do check if it is. It provides that feature. Usually most of them, but yeah. So in that situation, instead of registering to the Entra ID and then giving access and all, you can simply enable the managed identity on the resource. When you enable it, there are 2 ways you can create the identities. Further, you can say there are 2 more types of managed identity. One is system, another one is user. Okay. Now, in order to understand, let's suppose this application needs to access this database. Now, instead of a person typing username and password every time, the application has its own identity, which is created in the Entra ID. When you enable it, the identity will create in the Entra ID, and you can see that ID as well. Okay. Now, if the app runs on one computer, like one virtual machine, that computer gets an ID or ID card, let's say, which is system assigned, which is assigned to that particular system. If this system is talking to this database, only this system, then simple system assigned will work. It is assigned to the system. What if this application, this VM is also running the same application, let's suppose, and this is also talking to this DB, right? Now, we can have more such virtual machine. So instead of enabling system ID on all the virtual machine, all needs the same access, we can create a user identity or user managed identity, user assigned managed identity, right? So what will happen in that situation? A single identity will be enough to authenticate for the database via multiple virtual machine. If you have, for example, you have more than one machines, right? Why? Because in case system assigned belong to a system, particular system. So in case if you delete system, identity will also be deleted. But if you enable the user identity, if you delete the system, user identity still prevail in the Entra ID and this connectivity will work. It's very simple. Now, because this is SC900 describe, we are not getting too much into the detail. So if we talk about workload identities, there are two types of workload identities: application or service principals and managed identity. Service principal is when we register the application to the Entra ID and get the application ID and security key and use them to provide the access so that application can access the another resource. Because here, this VM where the application is running is trying to access this resource database in that situation. Now, if you don't want to manage those credentials, we can simply utilize managed identity, which means the same service principal process will happen, but just like any other managed service, this identity will become managed identity. Everything will be taken care by Microsoft, and you can simply use that object which is created in Entra ID when you enable the managed identity. Now, managed identity could be system based or user assigned. System assigned, it is assigned to a system, one particular system, and when you delete the system, this will be gone. But user assigned means you can assign it to the multiple systems. It is an identity object created in Entra ID. All right. Now, just wanted to show you for the sake of this video. If I come here, I go to home under Entra ID. If I come here under app registration, here you can register any application, right? You can give the information and you can register. If I show you, for example, this one is register, already expired. You have your application ID, right? And when you register, you also get the credentials, certificate and secrets that you can utilize already. And now let me show you the managed identity. Let me go to one VM. Let's suppose this is a VM, the VM that I was showing you on the diagram. And if you try to check under where it will go, under identity, you will find system assigned and user assigned. If you want system assigned, you can simply on. Once you click save, registered with the Entra ID. That's what I was talking about. Once it is registered, VM01 can be granted permission to access resources protected by Microsoft Entra ID.